Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a brand new titanium wood stove from Pomoly known as the Traveler. So let's get right into it. Okay, so getting started with the Traveler series of stoves. This is totally titanium. It is 0.06 millimeters thick. It is incredibly lightweight. I'm going to cover the specs in just a little bit. I do want to point out that this version does have one glass window. The other side is a solid titanium wall. And we also have a little glass window in the front of the door. Now this stove is a non-folding stove, meaning it does not flat pack like the rest of the Pomoly lineup. However, the legs do still fold, and they are nice, generous, long legs to get the stove up off the ground. I'll demonstrate that right now. We'll open up all four legs, get the stove standing up properly. Very easy operation to those legs, getting the stove up nice and high. Now inside I do have the damper and a pipe and a spark arrestor. The stove comes with all of these items. However, these items have already been used. They've already been burned on a previous stove. I'm just using it for simplicity for today's demonstration. But the stove does come complete with a stove body, a spark arrestor, a stove pipe, and the damper piece which goes on top. So let's talk about the specs. Okay, so talking about the specs of the stove, I do have the current listing pulled up on my phone with all of the information. Let's start with the weight of the stove. It is 3.3 pounds, which is 1.5 kgs. This stove is absolutely feather light. Very, very light stove. Very well built also. I have to say, I'm looking forward to burning in this stove. So talking about the folded dimensions, we have 14.6 inches by 7.1 inches by 7.5 inches. That is 37 by 18 by 18 centimeters. Assembly dimensions are 14.6 inches by 7.1 inches by 12.2 inches. We also have 37 by 18 by 31 centimeters. So that is the difference with the legs, obviously making it taller. The side glass is 11.02 by 3.15 inches. That's the specs for the glass, which is in centimeters, 28 by 8 centimeters. The pipe length is 9.5 inches, 24 centimeters. So that's this guy right here. We then have pipe diameter is 2.36 inches, 6 centimeters. So that's talking about the hole in top, which also corresponds with the damper. Spark arrestor is included, as I've already mentioned. The material is titanium, 0.6 thickness of millimeters, I should say, 0.6 millimeters of thickness. That's for the stove body. Obviously the stove pipe is significantly thinner and it holds up very well to extreme temperatures. The warranty on the stove is 2 years, so that's a very good warranty. That should cover all of the necessary specs. So we'll get the phone out of the way and we'll start taking a look at the functions and the design of the Traveler stove. Alright, so having a look at the front of the Traveler stove, we can notice that the door is a very generous size. We also have enlarged vents, so this is an upgrade from the T1 stove. These are much longer. We also have the draft control, which is very easy to operate. And then we have the latch for the door, opening the door. Inside, we can see that there is a false bottom. This does have venting in it. It is riveted to the stove body, so it does not come out. This will also prevent any type of deformation or warping having it permanently installed. If you need to clean it, simply dump the stove out. All the ash will fall out, giving you a nice clean stove. Very easy operation with the door. Taking a close look at these legs, they are hollowed out to help save weight. They do have drilled holes in the very bottom, so if you do wish to peg this stove into the ground, you can do so. And they simply fold underneath of the stove body, making it very easy to pack away and very easy to deploy. Coming over to the window side, you can see that we do have a generous sized glass window going from front to back of the stove. And if you look closely inside, you can see that false bottom with all the little slots cut in for airflow. This is an excellent way to see the stove when you need to add wood and when it's good to burn for a while. On the top of the stove, right where the damper goes in place, we can see that there are 3 titanium knurled nuts. These simply unscrew out, no tools needed. And then you drop in your damper piece and you secure it back with the screws. Very easy operation. Taking a look at the rear of the stove, you'll notice that it is completely riveted. These rivets will not let go under the heat load. One thing I do want to point out is the shape. So it is not just a square box. It has these side pieces and these little angles on the top. This helps reflect the heat into the center of the stove, and on the bottom it helps collect all the ash towards the middle of the stove, thus for not landing in the corners and creating cold spots in the stove. Okay, so now that we are familiar with the stove and some of the features around it, we're going to install the damper. So I'm just going to loosen off these 3 titanium screws. As I mentioned, no tools needed. This makes this process extremely easy. Then take our damper piece, which has the built-in damper. We're just going to pop it on top, lining up those holes, and then replace the 3 screws. This system is very, very easy and very strong as well. So we'll get that secured on there, and then we're going to unroll our stovepipe. Now, like I said, the stovepipe is already pre-burned. I've used it in a previous project. For simplicity's sake, when you do receive your titanium pipe, you are going to have to form it. I like using a foam pool noodle for the very first time. Have 2 people roll it around the foam noodle and then place all your rings on it, and then bring it out to your stove and burn it for a good 2 hours. You'll see that it will change color, and that will build in the memory to your stove pipe. This one has already been pre-burned, so I'm going to unroll it and assemble it to the top of the stove, placing the spark arrestor on the top of the pipe, and then we're going to load the stove full of wood and start the burn-in process. Alright, so now that I've got the stovepipe assembled to the damper piece, all you got to do is push one of these rings all the way down nice and snug. That will hold the pipe secure. I like putting the seam of the pipe orientated in the back, right where the damper handle is, and this makes for a very simple and strong setup. Alright, so now that we've got the stove totally assembled, one thing I will point out is I do not have guy lines hooked on the top of the spark arrestor today. If you are going to be out camping and it is going to be windy, attach some guy lines to the top of the spark arrestor, guying it out to the ground. That will prevent your pipe from flailing around. I'm going to also mention that I am using a custom pipe today. It is much shorter than what the one is going to be shipped with the stove is. I cut my pipe with a pair of scissors for a very specific tent use, so the pipe will be longer. Check the specs on Pomoly.com when you order your stove to make sure the stove pipe is going to be long enough for your particular setup. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to basically start the stove the worst way possible. I'm going to be using birch bark, and I'm going to be using very, very dry, kiln-dried pine and spruce. And the reason why I say the worst way is when I do my stove testing, I like to get the stoves very hot, very quickly, which is a no-no. I don't recommend doing it, but the reason why I like doing it is to see, is the stove going to fail? Is it going to warp at all? This is going to prove what's going to happen. So I'm going to get this loaded up with some birch bark. I'm going to get my pine and spruce in there. We're going to throw a match in and start the burn process. Okay, so far everything is looking very good. I've closed the front draft down probably about 3/4 of the way. I have the damper in the rear wide open, And this thing is burning incredibly hot, very nice and stable too. I could feel the heat just throwing. So the top is already turning color. We've already gone through the blue and purple phase where it is a thinner titanium. It'll change color very quickly. And at the end of the video, we're going to take a look at the stove to see, is there any deformation at all? So far everything is looking really good, and I gotta say, this is a very nice burning stove with that false bottom installed. Okay guys, we've been burning in the stove for about 25 to 30 minutes now, and I've already loaded in a couple pieces of hardwood. So we do have a mix of softwood and hardwood in there. I've been playing around with the damper and the draft setting, opening and shutting rapidly, and I have got to say it is extremely responsive on the stove. Now before I demonstrate that, I do want to point out that these side windows will turn black. If you can notice right in the center, it is actually starting to clean itself. So once your stove gets burning in a nice stable state and you've got the damper and draft set properly and is burning very stable, the window will clean itself off with all the heat. It'll burn off all that carbon deposit and it'll be crystal clear. So I just want to point that out, that yes, it will turn black at first and then it'll burn itself off. But watch what happens when I shut this draft. If you can hear in the microphone, and just kind of watch what happens to the fire. That is extremely responsive. The sound just went right down. The draft in the rear is about a quarter shut. That right there is the setting to burn at. That is a nice stable burn. So if I leave it like that for about 20 minutes, that window will be burned completely off. The draft setting is very easy to manipulate, and the damper in the rear, once you shut that down, it really starts ticking and it really starts heating up very quickly. And then of course when you open it up all the way, it lets a lot of the heat out through the pipe, but it also increases the burn at the same time. So you'll have to experiment with your draft and damper settings on any stove. This stove looks like it's going to be very responsive and very easy to operate. Alright, so the stove is totally cooled down. It was burning for about 2 hours approximately, and I have to say this thing performed extremely well. So let's have a close look at the stove. I'm just going to get this stove pipe out of the way. As you guys can see, the stove glass did clean itself off totally, and then during the burning out process where it started smoking a lot, it did start to blacken again, which is very typical, happens with most stoves. But when this is operating at temperature, this is nice and clean. I had it clean front to back, and I was very surprised with that. So on this side of the stove, we can see a little bit of color change. Now this stove totally changed to its final color on the top and on some of the sides and all over the place. And what I'm talking about is blue, bronze, purple, and then back to white. So the final color of titanium when it reaches the temperature is going back to its natural color, which is basically a white, a very, very pale blue. Right over here, you guys can see there is still a bit of bronze, purple, and blue. The wood was situated here, and the heat went all the way around the wood. Now this will change color as I did not rake out the coals. I just kept piling the wood on top. So you guys can see that the stove did get incredibly hot, very, very warm. The front of the door changed to its final color as well. The entire top of the stove is totally evenly changed to one color, as you guys can see right there. So this stove got extremely hot. Having a look at the bottom of the stove, we can see that the entire center from my finger here all the way up to here changed to its final color. And then we start to get into blues and purple and bronze here. So this front section still needs to change color, but all the heat was directed towards the back of the stove as I did not pull the coals forward. So this stove works extremely well. I played around with the draft and the damper setting. Every setting burned incredibly well. And I was actually very surprised to see that you can damp this stove down very, very, very minimal, to the point where it's just smoldering coals and it still generates a ton of heat, which means this is going to burn for a very long time. So there is absolutely zero warping on this stove, which is one thing that I'm incredibly surprised about with these long panels. This side obviously is not going to warp with the glass, but this side, where it is a very long flat panel, they've combated the warping issue with these sloped angles, so that adds a lot of rigidity inside of the stove. And there is no warping on the top or on the sides at all. I'm very, very surprised with that. The door operates without any issue. The draft in the front opens, no issue there. The handle, everything operates totally as it should. And then you guys can see the grate inside, no warpage on that at all. Everything worked incredibly well. So all in all, I have got to say that the new Traveler series stove is a very, very nice stove. Now, this is not designed for backpacking. As the name states, Traveler, it's more for traveling. It's more for putting in your truck, putting in your car, on your ATV, on a sled if you're pulling a bulk sled in the wintertime. This thing is just incredibly lightweight. You can put all kinds of gear inside of it, including the damper and the stovepipe, and it just makes for a very, very nice stove. Now, if you really wanted to backpack with this, you could put gear inside of the stove, thus for taking up the cavity, but it's really for traveling. It's made for cars, it's made for trucks and traveling around. It's very quick to set up. There's no putting pieces together. Just drop the legs, install the damper, pipe, and you're ready to burn. So all in all, this stove gets 2 thumbs up. Another winner from Pomoly. If you guys are interested in this, check out pomoly.com for the full listings and more photos and a little bit more information. That is all that I have for you guys today. So I hope you guys like the stove. If you have any more questions or comments, drop it down in the comment section and I'll be sure to get back to you. Peace out, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.